Welcome to the Real Recovery Show. We are every Friday at noon, and we're so thrilled to have all the variety of shows that we have. It's just been an amazing journey so far. It's crazy that we're 3/4 of the way through our first season. Just amazing amounts of insights and connections with people, and people I've met that I don't know that I would have met otherwise, and things I got to learn and share, and just been amazing. I feel so grateful for it. And today's topic is a really good topic. I've known that I have struggled with codependency pretty much most of my life, right? I'm a child of the 70s, and all the self-help books were all geared towards trying to have boundaries and trying to discover who you were and all that other stuff. And so that word was like, I mean, you knew what it was if you had those issues, and yet I grew up in an environment where there was a lot of codependency in all the different directions of my house, of my family, but I didn't know necessarily what was what and why it was happening the way that it was. Like parents staying together when they hated each other. Ways in which there was transactional love in interchanging between my parents and myself, my sister, and my brother, feeling an overdeveloped sense of responsibility for other people's feelings and well-being when it really clearly wasn't supposed to be that way, and learning things like people-pleasing and building walls to seeming to protect myself, but then self-abandoning and breaking them all down and having no boundaries whatsoever, getting into situations where I was desperate for attention or love or affection, and taking on relationships with people where I felt sorry for them or they felt sorry for me, and on and on and on. And so like codependency has been such a thing interwoven in the cause and condition of all my addictions, but also been what has the healing of that, the recovery of that has made me have such a deeper, more enriched experience in recovery, and I could always tell when somebody speaks to a group in recovery, when they've done work on codependency, you could tell they really are like, they have a much broader understanding of what's going on, and you could tell like they're much more comfortable in their own skin, because a lot of times we would do drugs and alcohol because we are so uncomfortable in our own skin, and we really don't have tools, and we wouldn't admit it necessarily, but we're afraid of people, and we care too much what people think, and we have insecurities about how to really take care of ourselves and protect ourselves, but we have no idea where the compass is on how to know how to take care of ourselves and what normal is and healthy is, and I myself have lived that way, having to go deeper and deeper to address and pull up the roots for what was driving the bus for so much, and also to get to forgiveness and to heal familial relationships where I can see that they were doing the things that they were doing because of misguided understanding of who they thought they were supposed to be and what they thought they needed from other people, and for other people for them to be comfortable in their own skin. And like, there's so many layers to this, and I've always thought that it was more women that were so focused on trying to heal themselves and relationships and blah, 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 and the bleeding hearts and the codependence. But as you go deeper and deeper, you realize that this is everybody, babe. This is everybody. And what's so awesome about today's topic is we get to talk to two men in recovery from codependency who have been focused on healing for many years, who I've known personally for many years. And it's just it's a much more enriching conversation when you talk to somebody who genuinely wants to know what the problem really is and what the solution is. And so today we are joined with Mike and Tom. And they're going to each share a little bit about what was it like growing up for them, and when they started to really see the benefit of working on aspects of codependency for themselves, and peeling the onion and learning more, and what the effects of their codependency were in their struggles with it, and then what they ended up being as they healed more and more, how they ended up getting more comfortable and more confident, and having healthier interactions with people, and as well as finding out who they are themselves, right? So we're going to start off with you, Mike.
All right, Lisa. Well, it's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
You know, it started out for me, my grandfather moved here from Italy, and he bought a big piece of land, and he subdivided it. So when his children got married, my dad's 3 sisters and my dad, we all lived in the same yard. There were different houses, but it was the same yard. And so even though I was an only child, I had a lot of cousins, and you can imagine what that was like, living in that kind of an environment. It was wonderful, but it was really hectic. There was a lot of arguments, there was a lot of yelling, there was a lot of loving, there was a lot of eating together, and sometimes someone that was in the group would get upset and go home and eat instead of eating together. So that's how it started for me.
Interesting. And so what happened as you were getting older? What happened to make you start to feel like something's not right?
Well, I was the I guess you could say golden child. I was the one that I didn't do anything wrong.
Oh, that's awesome.
Edward was the one that did it wrong.
No idea what that feels like, but that's great.
And Mary Lou did everything wrong. So I took on that role, and then I started fixing everybody else, because since I was perfect, my job was to fix everybody else.
Interesting.
And so it was exhausting, but I didn't realize it at the time, because it's what kept me going. And the way I tried to fix people was by changing them, because I figured the only way to fix them was to make them like me.
Yeah. After all, you're so perfect, right?
Yeah.
Were you the oldest, or somewhere near that?
Well, I was 11 months older than Edward and Mary Lou. I had one other cousin that was older than us, but we didn't really hang out with him. And then I had a number of there was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of us children that lived in the same yard.
Yeah, that's usually, not always, sometimes I'll ask that question when somebody has like the hero child type persona, that overdeveloped sense of responsibility. Oftentimes it is the one that's the oldest, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's just something happening with the parents, and there's like a focus on this one child to be that person. But yeah, so usually it is the oldest. I'm the oldest too, so I get that.
I kind of was the oldest because the older cousin was kind of an outcast, because he was a problem. So I kind of was the oldest. Yeah.
So you graduated.
I graduated.
Okay, interesting. And but you didn't think it was a problem then. You just thought that everybody else had the problem, and you just needed to fix everybody else, right?
I knew everybody else had the problem.
Oh, knew, right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
And so it was my job to fix them. And as then, my parents moved from Connecticut to California.
Oh,
So
wow.
now it was just me and my parents. And that's when life became tough,
Interesting.
because I was comfortable in that little compound, but now I had to interact with the world. So
Oh my God, how interesting is that? So you went from being the one who had all the answers to your own little like group, and then now it's just you. And so you need to kind of recreate that in some way. Did you feel like on some level you recreated it then?
what I did was, my parents were upper middle class, and so all my friends were way below upper middle class. And that way there I was,
Yeah, for sure.
I was the guy,
Yeah. Yeah. King of your little mountain.
king of my little mountain.
That's awesome. And so what was your relationship with your parents then, that you felt like you had to be so in charge?
Well, all the adults in that compound, including my parents, they never gave us a chance as children. Like if you got one of those little block things with the round peg and the triangular peg and the square peg, if the baby was trying to find the round hole and couldn't find it, one of the adults would put it in for him. So that's how I grew up. And it didn't only happen with puzzles, it happened with anything I was trying to do. They always took over and did it. So at some point I said, I might as well let them do it, because I don't get a chance to do it anyway. And so what I missed was the joy of that little baby when they find that round peg and they put it in that hole. They are, woo, they accomplish something. So I missed that.
So how does that translate then? Because your parents are now people who want to provide everything, do everything for you, and you were someone who felt like you needed to fix your cousins, right? Your little compound before. So now you're in a new place. Now you're in California, totally different from Connecticut, and but your parents are going to continue doing all the things. How does that change your dynamic?
Well, the problem was, I had to fix my parents too.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Because my parents fought and they screamed, and sometimes they lost their voices. And it started Saturday morning, and it happened during the week, but that was just kind of this was an all-day thing, and I was always in the middle of it. I was the only child, but they wouldn't. It was funny when you mentioned that in your intro, because they stayed together forever, but they just screamed at each other. I mean, unbelievable. One time I actually remember, they were always going to get divorced. I remember being in the hallway in our home in California, and each one of them had an arm, and they were figuring out who was going to get me when they got divorced. That was brutal.
But then they ended up staying together.
They always stayed together.
I kind of feel like watching my parents stay together no matter what was happening. Like, they slept in separate bedrooms. They talked bad about each other. There was never any, admiration. Just watching that taught me, stay anyway in relationships, even if it's not necessarily optimal, stay anyway. And then being in an environment that I was growing up, it was so toxic and dangerous in my house. And I wanted to run away, and I planned on running away. And I did dream of my parents getting divorced and who I would stay with. And it was going to be my dad, but they didn't do that. Every time my mom would go away, we would have conversations. Maybe she won't come back. And that's just how it was. I mean, I've forgiven all that now, but that was definitely what's happening. So, but I also feel like codependency wise, I definitely grew up accepting very dysfunctional situations because, one, it was modeled for me with my parents, but two, I wanted to run away and I didn't. I had this kind of at least I know this dysfunction, at least I know how to duck this, how to be a certain way so I don't maybe get hit or something like that. I thought, at least this, I have no idea what it's going to be like out there, so I better stay. And that kind of decision, that kind of programming has stayed with me my whole life. It's something that is much, much less than it was before, but it is still there, where I will be in a relationship and I'll start to feel maybe this is not healthy for me, and that idea will come up, but you don't really know what's behind door number 2, And so it's interesting. I think sometimes we think, well, why talk about the childhood? It's where a lot of our programming started, and then when we focus on, why we make the decisions, why certain things that are not okay are okay with us, why we stay in situations that are otherwise, other people would be like, what are you doing? And wish something better for us. It's because there are ideas in our mind, this programming in our mind that's totally okay with it because it believes that it's for our good. It's how it's what we need, until we uncover it. So that's why I was asking, it's interesting what happens to make you get to a place where you're like, okay, if you're out of the chute wanting to fix everybody, because you're the golden child, I totally understand that. I understand. I mean, I didn't have the golden child experience, but I definitely had I have to be the little mother experience, and I have to be in charge. I'd never had the Lisa can do no wrong.
Right.
I had the Lisa can only do wrong. So I had the other side. I was a hero child and the black sheep at the same time, which, by the way, is very complicated, but I did that. So yeah. So then what happened to finally get you to a place where you got into school, relationships? What happened?
Well, what happened is I I always gravitated to one person, a male and a female, and I wanted to be. I wasn't a group kind of person. So when I was 15, my parents knew my wife's parents, and they introduced us.
Oh.
And they were both on vacation, and randomly they ran into each other. And her and I went to the same high school. We were 15. So I said, I think I might have even said I'm going to marry her. Oh. And so I looked her up as soon as the first day of school, and we got married at 19.
Wow.
And we loved each other, but I was trying to change her. I didn't like the way she was, and I wanted to change her.
Well, what made you want to marry her if you didn't like the way she was?
I don't know. So
was she a project? Did you feel that way, though, from the start? Like, I'm going to marry her, and she's going to do so well under my tutelage.
Probably, because, see, my wife is sparkly, and my mom wasn't sparkly.
Okay.
So I tried to make her not sparkly. And she's wonderful sparkly. I mean, everywhere she goes now, everybody loves her shoes and everything.
Okay.
Her top, because it's always sparkly. So what happened is our marriage wasn't working. And I said, I've got to learn to fix her.
Right.
I mean, my motivation wasn't to look at me,
right.
but my motivation was to fix the relationship, so that meant fixing her.
Right.
And so I just knew that things weren't working. And then we had 2 children, and actually we had 3 miscarriages, so then when we had 2 children, it made it even more special. And I got a wonderful job, and we moved a little bit, but life just didn't work for me. And besides my wife, life didn't work for me at work. It didn't work it really showed up in other relationships, because those I would leave. And, with my boss, I would just go off and get fired from that particular job, not from my job, because I couldn't. But so that's why I started working on stuff.
Did you have anger? Did you have? Yeah.
Rage.
Yeah. And so it's interesting, because one of the things that you felt you needed to fix about your parents was the yelling and the fighting. And then, of course, we end up doing what we saw, at least in part, right? I also had lots of anger issues, and there was tons of fighting in my house. So, and silence, really, really bad silence. But yeah. And so the anger, the ways of how we take care of ourselves and check out or try to make ourselves feel better, and then finding that those two could be problems, and then
and what happened is my dad especially was very emotionally and verbally abusive, so that's what I did. And so I had this wonderful relationship with my son and daughter and my wife, but they could never get to the finish line. And then all of a sudden the rage had come out and the abuse, and it was like, and then when I got done raging, I'd say, let's go to the movies, and they'd go,
nothing to see here.
Are you kidding me?
We're still licking our
bleeding,
wounds.
Man.
Wow. So when was that? Like what period of time?
Well, in 85, I started having problems at work, even though I had the kind of a job where I was a pilot. So when you're a pilot, you really don't get fired unless you do something,
big,
bad with flying. My problem wasn't with flying, so I started having problems with work. So I had to go to therapy. I didn't want to go, and I never would go. And so I decided that since I was going to go to therapy, I'm a reader, so I decided since I'm going to go to therapy, I'll go to a behavioralist. I'll go to a PsyD, a Freudian kind of guy, and I'll go to a psychiatrist. So I started therapy with three people at the same time.
Overachiever. I get you. I see you. Yeah.
And so,
okay, so and then when you were doing that, though, were you then more into looking to see how you can help yourself?
Well, I was clinically depressed, so I wanted to function. I was not functioning at all. I mean, if I on Saturday morning, if I took our 2 cars to the car wash to get washed, I felt like that was
A day.
an accomplishment for the week.
Yeah.
I just wasn't functioning.
You know, and I don't know if this is true about you. You could tell me. So for me, because I had such anger and rage issues, to me, trying to not be that person without any tools, I would implode. So instead of exploding, I would implode. So I was either suicidally depressed or I was like homicidally angry, you know? And so it's either I'm going to kill you or me, but one of us is going. And so because of that, though, I didn't have any tools. I was feeling all that bad energy because I was thinking all that toxic stuff, and I didn't have the right perceptions of things. And so I was constantly loading up the gun, right? And getting depressed or blowing up, you know? And I meet a lot of people who have gone through dysfunction who do not blow up. And I think they're gonna one day, they're just gonna combust, because like, how can you implode that much and not like, but it ends up manifesting in illness, in all kinds of things when we pack that energy and it doesn't get expressed. And so, and definitely in codependency, because the addiction is them. The addiction is someone else. Like, anybody but me, nothing to see here, somebody else.
Well, I was so codependent with Jackie that I would have a luncheon with a friend and I couldn't leave her. And she wanted me to go. She's an introvert. I'm an extrovert. She's like, go to lunch. And I couldn't do it. I mean, I was uncomfortable. And I thought, you know, she won't make it without me. And
Right.
And so that's how bad it was. So I didn't go. I'd cancel. Sometimes I went. And then if I went, I was uncomfortable the whole time. And so then, after starting therapy, I thought, this is pretty cool, so I bought a counseling center because I figured that would fix me.
I remember that story. I remember that.
And then I got into a master's in counseling.
I remember that story too.
And really, you know, all that stuff was part of the process, and it all helped. But the real change came when I started getting into recovery with people that are in recovery. And that's when I started looking at me and taking responsibility and realizing the problem was me. And so now the change is that instead of changing Jackie, I've been able to see what an amazing person she is. And instead of her being quiet and withdrawn, she's bubbly and alive. And it's a beautiful thing, but it's been a long time, and we, you know, I didn't think we were going to make it, and we didn't. I mean, we separated and all that, but somehow we did, and somehow we both grew, and during that process, you go farther apart, and then we were able to come back together. So now, I mean, this morning she was telling me stories, and I'm just amazed because I never allowed her to do that. So she couldn't do it.
Interesting.
And I don't think she could do it. Growing up, she couldn't do it as much either.
I was going to say, because I know sometimes, especially when it comes to like addiction from alcohol and drugs, everybody wants to point to the person who's doing the alcohol or drugs. But with codependency, it's really tricky. It's so easy to see one person has a problem and the other person doesn't, and yet as one person starts to get help, more gets revealed, and you realize that they were never the victim of the other person. They were there because of their own stuff as well. Like we all, in the merry-go-round of denial, as they call it, there's this great pamphlet from Hazelden. It talks about how everybody's there having their part to play, their roles, you know, and how they see things, and they all of their stuff supports each other's stuff. And that's important to know because, you know, I was codependent with people who could be codependent with me. There were plenty of people that would not do that with me. And there are people that did. there are people that did, and they were fortunately my people for a while. And I took hostages that were willing to be hostages, and I was a hostage, and I was willing to be a hostage, and so I was wondering when I was listening to that, because I know like there's a reason why she stayed. There are reasons other than love. You know what I mean? Other than love and hope and being there for the potential of the future and for the kids. There are other things. There's the self-talk that tells you it's okay. One more day. It's okay. That's okay. That excuses something and says, you know what, blah 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 blah. Because on some level, they needed it. Like if because I was a very dominant person, I attracted passive people who wanted me to be dominant. I promise you. They wanted somebody else to take control. They wanted it. They didn't want to be the one to do it until they didn't like what happened. And then it was like, and then I would be the hero, and then I would be the scapegoat. And then I'd be the hero again, and then the scapegoat. And all that pressure that I took on myself, and all the overdeveloped sense of responsibility, the anger, and the despair. And there's a reason why this is such a hot topic, codependency. Because until we heal that, we're not able to meet people on a healthy level and have healthier relationships.
Well, when I would rage, Jackie would back down. My son would back down. My daughter, I have a visual when we lived in Denver in the hallway. I was screaming at her and leaning into her, and she just put her head right in my chest, and she wouldn't back up. She was leaning into me. And boy, I didn't know how to handle that one.
Wow.
And now, all those relationships had to be healed. And they are. And it took time. And I remember Jackie saying, I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop because I've seen this road before. And there's always a U-turn involved. And
or a wall.
Or a wall. And it didn't drop. Yeah. And then slowly trust builds up, and slowly the healing starts to take place, and slowly you live differently. And then it takes a long time, and it turns out great. But
That's beautiful.
It's painful.
That's beautiful. Yeah, sometimes I think we have cute little narratives for codependency that are more acceptable, like that person just really loves me, or I know that they're a really good person, you just don't know them like I do, or that person needs me, and I don't know what that person would do if I wasn't there, like that person would probably kill themselves, like it's just too much, and I don't really have a choice in this, or etc. And something just, or that person's super passionate. I mean, I know they keep a car. I get that, but that was a really off day. Like, whatever. It's just to recognize that, that codependency is people taking on roles that are unhealthy, but they do it from a perspective of they're identified with it, and they feel like this is who they need to be okay, and to be the person that other people need, in whatever way that is. And there's so much enabling that goes on in that. There's so much, like, everybody's supporting the dysfunctional programming, because they don't know any different until one person eventually has something happen where it forces them to do something different, and thank God for that. Thank God. Because otherwise as a society, we would just all as a society just spiral worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and there's such a movement and healing that I'm just so grateful to be a part of. So,
well, what Jackie's told me is the reason she didn't leave is a deep belief system, not because of some, yeah.
Interesting.
And so
a deep belief system in what?
That
supposed to be
together.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's normal too.
Yeah.
For our society.
But hers is deep. So it's so much that she didn't leave.
Yeah.
And then when Jackie's, for us to talk about our families, because our families are very similar, and for us to talk about our families just started to happen the last couple of years, to have the comfort to be able to talk, and that for me to not respond when she's talking about hers and just listen and not try to fix them or her or anybody. That's the deal, is being able. I never listened.
Me
I was
neither.
always thinking about what
Yeah.
I was going to say.
Yeah. Or that I didn't really value what the other person was saying. I just thought I knew better, and it's just really, really shitty. I would interrupt people, cut them off, and then I would be like, what the hell? Why are you even in this relationship if you're not actually in the relationship with them, So, yeah. But they're driven by deeper fears, They're driven by strong, strong energy that says, this is who I need to be okay. It's not just, I'm going to be this person, So thank you so very much for sharing that. And right now we're going to ask Tom to share a little bit about his life and what codependency looked like for him growing up. And
cool. Yeah, thanks for having me.
thank you for coming.
Yeah, like it's been said so far, I know, like in my family was actually the opposite. Like there was no fighting. I think my entire childhood there were maybe like 3 or 4 fights. It was like very. Wow. My mom like ruled the family with this kind of passive aggressive, with this look. She just gave you a look, and like you didn't want the look. And so and there was no, and there was like overt support, but it was a very any kind of affection was passed out based on achievement. It was like there was any emotions were shamed. It was a very like left brain family system, and it was like a looking good family system. It's like what people thought about us was more important than being authentic. That was like the underlying message, and so it kind of set up to kind of like be always seeking this outside validation and like try to like this whole people pleaser mask and almost a pathological need to be accepted and liked, like that carried out throughout my entire life. But I can see how it started really with the that underlying message that what people think about us is more important than being authentic.
Yeah.
And so I think from an early age I was already becoming a chameleon and abandoning myself, and I was really good at like figuring out what people wanted me to say, and so I'd be accepted and liked, and like had no concept of who I actually was. And it's as I went through life and like really and I mean, my mom was very good at getting us to like we both got straight A's. She set me and my brother in this kind of competitive thing. So like he got straight A's, so I got straight A's, and we went to the best schools, and we both got engineering degrees. And like I remember I was like when I graduated college, I was like, I had this engineering degree, and I was like, people were like, what are you going to do? And I was like, I don't know. I don't even want to be an engineer. It's like my mom actually filled out the application for that college. It's like I had applied to some like a couple other colleges that were kind of like the humanities, and she was like, oh no, that's not on the most competitive list. So she actually filled the application out, and I ended up going there, and like and I remember I'd go to job interviews, and they'd be like, so what are you going to do? And I was like, oh, I want to be in management. And they're like, well, usually you work as an engineer for a few years, and then like you decide if you want to go engineering or the management path. And I was like, no, I just want to be in management. I had no concept of like really of life. I was never taught like even like what a lease was, anything like that. I was like I had no idea like the common sense part of life, and like and so I ended up people asked me what I want to do, and I said I want to travel. And my parents gave me a car when I graduated college, and like I sold them, bought a one-way ticket to Amsterdam. I just like started backpacking and traveling, and like really started to like find myself who I really was, getting away from the family system where it was just so oppressive almost. And like this. So
you were aware that you were like so focused on trying to be somebody else, somebody to please her, to avoid shame.
I was not aware at all.
But you felt like there was something that was
the oppression.
Needed. Yeah.
Like, and I felt like something. I remember thinking like something's not quite right here. Like something's like, and because I'd go to the cafeteria, and like I'd always worry about like if I was sitting by myself, I'd be like, oh, everyone's watching me, everyone's looking at me, like, oh, he has no friends. I was just so hypersensitive to what people were thinking about me. That was like it's exhausting. It's like a horrible way to live, caring what people think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. I think I was a mix of both of you.
Yeah. Well, and
I was very focused on what people thought. And I would walk into a room and people were laughing, and I would think that maybe they were laughing at me, You know, I was so self-conscious because I also was, who do I need to be loved? How do I need to behave to not be hurt, to not be shamed, whatever? Like, I'm trying to protect myself, and there's like this element of living in a survival mode, right? And they say that a man who stands for nothing can fall for anything. And so, like, there was no deep anchoring, no listening and trusting my own self-awareness, my intuition. There was none of that. It was all, you know, who do I need to be? What do I need to look like? You know, don't feel your feelings. Don't show weakness. You know, you just need to be all this so that you can protect yourself and be okay and do all the things you need to do. But that feeling of being separate from yourself, that living outside of yourself, as I've learned in recovery, that I feel more and more confident and more peace the more I meditate, the more I'm centered, the more I'm in. That means that the opposite of was this abandonment feeling, like I was abandoning myself. I was living outside of myself, trying to be everything for anybody. So I totally see the desire to just be like, bye-bye. I'm going to go travel now, jump on some trains and all that. And what an amazing journey to go that way.
Yeah, I think there is no more emotional pain greater than like the not knowing who you are and being out of alignment with like your true self. Like, and I know there was no real nurturing in my family. Everything was based on externals. Like, okay, you get this, you get the best job, that's why then you'll be happy if your external world's in place. But there was no emotional intimacy. There was no vulnerability, and so there's no real connection. And so I think just as a human being, I wanted that, and like just. I think that was one of the first times I went against the family system. Was like, dude, I didn't even tell anybody. I bought a one-way ticket to Amsterdam. I was actually in jury duty when I was supposedly looking for a job, and I was going to these job interviews. I'm like, I do not want to get stuck in this, because I had no idea who I was, and so I bought a one-way ticket to Amsterdam on like a jury break, and I told my family, like, I'm leaving. Like, I'm going. My mom's like, I guess this is. I could see she was like panicking, you know,
because all the investment that she put into your
exactly.
future,
Like,
and you're doing what?
Yeah,
that was like the complete opposite of what she would want.
It was not part of the plan. Her plan. Like, I mean, she had good intentions. I mean, she was a very smart, very intellectual lady, but just came from a very perfectionist family system, and so it was like she had this idea. And they're Germans too, so it was like
I thought that too.
Yeah. This like idea of like, this is what you need. This is what you need to do to be happy, and like, it's just really, it's not really. There's no intuitive sense of like who, getting in touch with who you really are.
I don't know why that's true about Germans. Like, I'm half German. I'm German, Russian, Czechoslovakian, and I promise you, like, there's so much in that culture that is like known for the stuff that my dysfunctional childhood had in it anyway. And it's not like I lived there.
It's part of like the culture that when I was there, it was like they're just like, this is how you do it. No, this is what you do.
Yeah.
But
it's a mixed bag. I mean, with all cultures, you have certain things that end up becoming indicative of the culture, but then there's also the ability to focus and to be so, like lots of engineers.
BMWs and Mercedes.
Lots of engineers are German.
There's benefits to being hyper-focused and efficient.
Absolutely.
But, so then after the 3 years of traveling, I bumped into my first wife, and that was really my first very like codependent relationship where she was an addict and I felt good. Like I was like every day was an adventure, and I was like really I've been working my way like paying for myself for 3 years, and I really had a really high confidence. And then I ran into her, and she was like she was an addict, and she told me the first day I'd been a prostitute when I was younger and all this stuff, and I was like, none of that matters. Like, I love you, you're going to get married. And she's like, I don't even love you. And I was like, it doesn't matter. I was like, I love you enough for both of us.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, and I was just relentless. And I convinced her. And like, looking back on it, I was like, oh my God, this poor girl, man. She had her little life down there on the beach in South Africa. And I pulled her away from all of it. And like, I remember, and then it was a very enmeshed codependent relationship, and like where it was like I was trying to like keep her sober and like trying to work, and I paid all the bills, and I think it was like when I dropped her off to rehab and I came home and I was sitting there and I felt like this deep sense of emptiness and loneliness. Like I had no idea what to do with myself. My entire life revolved around her. And to me, that's what that codependency feels like. Emptiness, like not knowing who I am. Abandoning myself for so long, and then I'm left by myself, and I was like, who am I? I used to look at that mirror and be like, who are you? That's, I think it's one of the most painful experiences.
It is.
I think that's why, I drank and used drugs to cover up those feelings. Because it's
to cope with it.
To cope with it until the consequences from that got to be so bad that it was no longer an option.
I did too. I felt like I had to, because I would not let go of the story of who I thought I needed to be okay. I had such strong programming, so if I wasn't going to question that, then I was going to remain uncomfortable in my own skin and getting into a relationship after a hostage after relationship after hostage, and needing to do something to change the way I felt, because it wasn't tolerable the way it was. You know? I think that's the way codependency and addiction go hand in hand for a long time, because it makes it easier to stay stuck. It makes it easier to stay, to do the same things. You know, we disconnect ourselves from how awful it feels to be so others focused. You know, that it takes a journey. It feels like the longest journey to go all the way from out here in, you know, and to eventually get to a place where we choose to do that as our main thing is like amazing in recovery from codependency.
Oh yeah, I mean, as long as I'm looking externally to find my happiness or my peace, it's like there's nothing out there that's going to make me happy. Everything I need to be happy and fulfilled is inside here.
Right.
And so it's really, as I take the inward journey and find out who I really am, I'm like, well, I'm a whole human being. I don't need anybody to complete me. I don't need anybody to tell me who I am. Like, I can be happy just being me. And like, that's a good feeling. Like when you can really feel that and be like, wow, I'm like, I don't need anybody.
And then when we do go back out and we are helpful, and when we do want to be helpful to another person, it's not where we abandon ourselves and focus on the other person. It's where we learn to stay rooted in this moment, in ourself, in our true self, in our connection consciously with our higher self and God, right? That we end up giving from the overflow, you know, rather than going, you know what? Me, I'm taking care of me, I love me, you, all you, all you, all you, all you. And then, and that's why we're so sometimes terrified of the end of a relationship, because we know it's going to hurt, but what it hurts is the long walk back to getting right with ourselves. You know, how far away from being true to ourselves, that authentic self that you mentioned earlier, did we get? Where whatever it is, whoever we thought we were needed to be, or whatever we thought we needed to have with the other person, has become way too important. It has become our higher power. The relationship, the avoidance of looking at ourselves, you know? I personally know that one of my biggest driving forces, and I feel very much akin to Mike on this, is that I felt like I used helping people and being that hero to avoid looking at myself. I'm not saying that's what you did, but I'm saying that's what I did. You know? You did.
Yeah.
Okay, but and so and what's crazy is it's just like when you're in addiction for alcohol or drugs, when you have those moments of clarity where you become fully privy to the fact that you are doing this behavior, but you don't know that you could stop it. I remember thinking I would rather focus on somebody else than look at my own stuff. I don't want to deal with my own stuff. And so I would rather, and it's a way we check out, you know, like we don't have to check out with drugs or alcohol. We have our own inner pharmacy, you know, that we can just dial into by being hyped up and helping and hyper focused and hyper vigilant to anywhere but here, anybody but me. And that could go on for a long time. People could do that till they die, because it's not like alcohol and drugs. You can't point to it as easily. It's like, it's just a haze, you know? So people who can find that what's going on with themselves with codependency and actually start to do something about it is amazing to me, because, I mean, that's what's eating our lunch in so many ways. I
mean, codependency is part of the human condition. It's just
our societal thinking.
Oh, yeah, especially here in the West, where it's like, oh, you get all this stuff, you'll be happy. It's all... Really, like, because my external experience is a reflection of my inner state. Like, if I'm experiencing the external world in a negative way, it's because there's something inside myself that's off, or you know. And yeah, it is easier to fix other people they're not gonna be like, oh, like, look how good I am. I'm fixing all those people. I can't be bad. I'm fixing everybody.
To try to.
Try
To fix other people. Because even when we think we make some progress, it's like the whack-a-mole. It's like you go, okay, I got this. You're good with that. What's happening over here? Like, can't you, I don't understand, and it's like, we have to move from having projects to actual relationships, and like, really the relationship starts from within. It's the last place we want to go. It's the last place we want to look. But when we get to a place where we're good with or without someone, and we're the same person with or without someone, then we know we've started to hit some authentic pay dirt,
Yeah.
And that took a long time to not be like my head going up somebody else's butt, and then having to uncork and go back to, okay, who am I? I'm disoriented. What's happening? What's going on with my own life?
Yeah, and it's my job to make sure I keep my own cup full and practice good self-care.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I kind of know, like, when my codependency is creeping back in, because I'll start caring what people think again. And it's like, oh my God, like, not again, because I got to a place where I actually don't care what people think, and it's like, oh my God, it's all that energy I used to use to try to control how people see me. I have access to that energy to actually live a rich and full life. And anytime I'm trying to control something that's uncontrollable, I wind up being exhausting. That's like, we say it's like codependency is exhausting, like being authentic is energizing. The more I can be like true to myself, the more I get the energy that comes from like being like Shakespeare said, man, above all else, to thine own self be true. This has been around for thousands of years, man. It's like the human condition.
The funny thing, though, is that when we are in our addiction or our disease, is we hear things like that, like about, to thine own self be true, and we think we are. It's everybody else that's the problem. They're all lost, but it's not. It's actually that, and I've been on both sides. I've been over-dependent on somebody as well, so I've been the over-dependent, and I've been the one that's the super independent caretaker, right? Because I got to be all the things, because I'm a Gemini. But I mean, they're both horrible. They're both you have this learned helplessness, and this victim perspective on the downswing of that, and then you have this bloated sense of self that's out of touch with reality and thinks it has way more of a responsibility, and you get neck pain and shoulder pain and all kinds of weight of the world, like you're the Atlas, right? You're Atlas, and then. But both of them, they're not in touch with reality. There's no God center. There's no trusting that everybody has what they need. There's no live and let live. There's no true joining. There's just one has, one doesn't, and we're operating on the state of inequality. And yes, our society is riddled with that kind of thinking as well. So what have you guys learned in recovery from codependency, that like tools for boundaries or anything, like any things that like really come to your mind to share about?
Well, for me, I thought it was wrong to love myself. I thought it was wrong. I didn't even know what an authentic self was. I had no idea. If somebody tried to talk to me about it, it was like they might as well be talking another language. And meditation, I started meditation, as you mentioned. I started a morning time, and I started self-care. And so what happened was I almost observed myself changing. It's not, I mean, I did that work, but it wasn't like I flexed my muscles and said, I don't want to yell, or I want to understand other people, or I want to love people. And all of a sudden not all of a sudden, over time, I would notice, wow, I feel differently. I used to be around groups, and all my self-talk was judgmental because I didn't think I was right. I knew I was right, and I had to be right, and they had to be wrong, or I wasn't okay. And so that's what started to happen, and that made me want to continue, because it was a wonderful
That's
place to be.
a really good topic too, because with meditation, oftentimes when we think of meditation, we think of, okay, to be still, to connect consciously with a higher power, to and if you're new to meditation, you think maybe to control your thinking. Good luck with that one. But to become the observer and to become aware, because as we're tuning down the volume of the outside world and being so focused on everything else, we start to be more self-honest, and we start to hear the thing that we've been saying, and the way that maybe we have all the judgments, and we tell ourselves scary stories and we believe them, and we're getting ourselves all riled up. Things start to slow down. That whole pause when agitated starts to become easier and easier to do, because we start to tune into when we're about to blow way before we blow. Like when I first started, I felt like I would maybe get privy to the fact that I'm about to blow like a second before I blew. And then that was it. And then I'm trying to trying to stuff it back in while it's coming out. And I'm just like, all right, you know what? This is justified. And I would just ride it. But over time, because of meditation, like Mike had brought up, I would actually start to feel when tension would start in my body. I would start to feel when my blood pressure would start going up. And I had this visual of being in an Adventureland, which is the name of an adventure park in New York, but anyway, with a roller coaster where it's like tick, 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 going up, and I would feel my blood pressure as if it's going tick, 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 and I knew that if I hit a 4 or a 5, we're about to get hysterical. Like someone's going down, and because the energy is like building, 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 and there was a point of no return that I used to judge, but then I started to observe, and I started to go, of course. So I had to catch it sooner. Leave the conversation, walk out of the room, stop, ask myself, go back after, and go, okay, I know I was starting to get upset. Why wasn't I practicing self-care and leaving the room and pausing and finding out what was going on? What got triggered in me, right? Meditation is so invaluable for any kind of healing and recovery, but with codependency, it's anywhere but here, anybody but me, right? So getting to a place where I can then take personal responsibility, get comfortable in my own skin, I can start actually getting aware of what's triggering me and what's setting me off before it's something I can't control, right? And things start to happen. We value peace more, where I didn't value peace.
Right.
Like, you didn't value self-love? I didn't value peace. Peace was awkward silence to me. I couldn't handle that. When I first felt peace, I was like, what is that? That's uncomfortable. That's the absence of conflict. Nobody's alive. What is this? And then I started to see the value of that. Meditation's been invaluable. I know you meditate a lot too.
Yeah. I mean, I think meditation, I have a daily 20 minutes every single morning. That's part of my spiritual routine. But I think that, that breaks down the ego. And really the ego is the thing that's like judging, wants to fix people, was judging everybody, has that kind of vertical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's some people better, some people less than, and it's just another, codependency is just another protective layer of the ego. And it's like the more I can have the ability to transcend that, because my authentic self, man, it doesn't judge anybody. It doesn't want to fix anybody. It just is pure unconditional love.
Mm-hmm.
It came from God. It's going to return from God. It doesn't fear.
And it isn't anybody else's higher power. Our authentic self is not anybody else's higher power. We don't need to play God.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which we know. I know when I'm not in my authentic self, when I do have this idea that somebody needs me, and then it's hold on, that's old thinking. Is that possible?
And I realize I'm in my own. Everyone's in their own dream. Mm-hmm. I try to impose my dream on somebody else. There's going to be friction. I gotta accept people where they're at, and really when that serenity and peace come from inside here, I just be sitting folding my laundry and just be happy for no reason except I'm alive. I love that feeling of serenity and peace, and I don't get that when I'm just striving, looking externally for validation or oh my God, that's.
Yeah.
Because I don't have people, places, and things. I have the illusion of control. I don't have any control. I can manipulate, but really, man, all that's just so exhausting, man. The more I can let go and surrender, because my ego has no concept of this underlying creative intelligence that's in charge of everything.
Right. The
more I can let go and surrender to that, then I'm oh wow, then I can just enjoy the journey, man. Wow, this life is beautiful, man. I can go out and watch the sunrise. I'm wow, life is good, man. I don't need any external.
That's
things.
mindfulness. So
Mindfulness,
there's the
yes.
meditation practices of actually sitting and focusing, and then there's the mindfulness that is something that is meditational throughout the day, and checking in and staying consciously connected with our intuition and how our body feels and how we are right in that moment, and seeing how far outside of ourselves, seeing how up in our head we can get, seeing how focused on another person we can get. That scary story that we could tell ourselves and going, you know what, right now, what am I doing? I'm doing the laundry. I'm washing the dishes. I'm noticing the trees. It's like it tunes down that self that thinks it needs to do the thing, and just calms down and says, you know what, I'm good. I'm good right here, exactly the way I don't need to do anything. I could trust. And I'll say this too, and this was actually really helpful for me in healing codependency, was just like in healing from alcohol and drugs, there's this saying to think through the drink. Like I would fantasize about what it was like when I did the alcohol or the drugs, and I would think, oh, maybe I could just have one. But then I would think, but then what would I do? And then what would I do? And then what would I experience? And I don't even know, but it can't necessarily be better than being in recovery. And I don't want to give up my sobriety date. So I would get out of that thinking, right? Well, with codependency, I have so much wreckage in my past. I have mugshots of past relationships. I have drama scenes that things that ended up happening to me and by me, and so the idea of wanting to take somebody and try to run their life, or try to fix somebody, or or even on the other side being, them rescuing me and whatever, I would think through that drink, right? So if I'm being super helpful to a person, I think, right? But then they want me to be, so they start to feed it, right? Now they become more dependent upon me. I start to see myself getting overwhelmed. I start to see myself getting stressed. I get resentful and martyry, and I start to get afraid of saying no and stuff like that. So I see that it's not just my behavior that I'm concerned about. It's feeding and joining with another person, because codependency can only be codependency when you have somebody else to be codependent with. And so if you have somebody that's willing to dance that dance, it's stickier, it's harder. They know what to say and what to do. And then on the other side, I knew how to do that too. I was the victim. Feel sorry for me. Take care of me. And so what happens with that is that if I am the person who is the caretaker, I am enabling somebody. I am feeding their sense of helplessness and victim story. And if I am the over-dependent caretakee, then I am putting myself down. I am lowering my own vibration. I am telling myself I don't have what I need. And you just, I don't know, over time in recovery, we think through the drink. We think through the step. We move at the speed of sanity, and we don't need another person necessarily to complete us. We start to be comfortable being alone, and we do that through meditation and through fellowship with other people who are also wanting to heal, who are also taking responsibility for themselves. And we learn how to be in healthy, functional relationship systems and dynamics by being in recovery with other people focused on the solution and taking more and more responsibility. So thank you so much, guys. I knew it was going to be good. I love you guys so much. I've known you guys for years, and I'm so grateful that you guys came to join us on the Real Recovery Show. Please remember that the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the people who gave them and do not represent any 12-step program or should replace your own intuition or professional medical advice. And although we didn't mention any 12-step program or any kind of modality that helps, there are several 12-step programs that could be helpful if you are struggling with codependency. One is CODA. Another one is ACOA, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics. And if you are dealing with another person's addiction or affliction, you can go to Al-Anon, which is mainly for people who are struggling with somebody else's drinking, or Nar-Anon, which is for people who are struggling with basically any kind of addiction, more so importantly, drugs. And so if you have any questions about that, come to themeetingspace.com, contact us through the meeting space or call us at the Recovery Store, and we'll answer your questions. And you can watch us on Facebook, YouTube, Amazon Fire TV. You can listen to us on the PHLV radio app. You can get our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. See you next week.